Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And in this video, as Keir Starmer has been visiting Germany in his efforts to reset relations with the EU generally and individual member states individually, I'd like to discuss what the Daily Telegraph has presented as the latest plan to preserve Brexit for the long term. I mean, you'll never believe it, but it involves doing something that is not only highly unlikely, but if they ever did do it, would almost certainly sink Brexit as a concept. And this particular piece, it's written by Patrick O'Flynn, who's a journalist, but used to be an MEP for UKIP, had a long career in journalism for various Eurosceptic newspapers. He's written an article which suggests there's only one way to stop Starmer trashing Brexit, which is marvellous, because actually, if there's only one way they think they've got of stopping us reversing Brexit, there's only one thing we need to do to disrupt it. But as it turns out, this plan is so ill thought out that if the Tories ever applied it, they'd basically destroy themselves. They'd certainly keep themselves in opposition for a very, very long time. But before I get into this proposed solution, best to go over the trajectory of this thinking. So how does he think Starmer's trashing Brexit? After all, it's far too many people, rejoiners, behave as if Starmer, one of the most vocal opponents of Brexit in the country before we left the EU, got kicked in the head by a horse and is now a committed Brexiteer. But O'Flynn thinks that Starmer is going to have us rejoin bit by bit. Salami slicing, as he refers to it, a term that's often used in politics to mean a gradual move towards a final goal, which realistically is how you always move towards a major reform. And as I've said before on this point, I agree with O'Flynn and other Brexit supporters who've suggested the same thing. As he notes himself, Starmer's been meeting Scholz for the 5th time today since becoming Prime Minister. He's only been he's not even been Prime Minister for quite 8 weeks yet. We're still a couple of days shy of that. As I keep saying, the Labour government have not only turned the country completely around in terms of its attitude towards the EU, from, oh, we should be as hands-off as possible and do things our own way, to, no, we should move much closer to the EU on literally every policy area. That is what they're explicitly saying. But also, it's not just that it's facing the right direction now, it's trying to move much more closely to the EU very quickly, more quickly than the EU is keen on. What we're going to find out is that actually it'll be the EU applying the brakes here. It's becoming increasingly frustrating to me. You've now got rejoin proponents explicitly saying that Starmer could choose to join the single market immediately, which is as dishonest as any claim made by any Brexiteer. I keep saying we should talk about the single market. We should absolutely talk about joining the single market, even though we're not realistically going to be able to do it, because we need to be able to get a conversation going about what we've lost. But we're not going to win the cause by lying to people, especially when it's a lie that's not only easily exposed, but the media will be only too happy to do so if they think it's a lie that becomes sort of entrenched. And then we discredit the entire project. By all means, talk about what we've lost by leaving the single market. I wish people would talk about the customs union more. But don't pretend we can just join again and quickly. The EU are resisting sounding positive about even smaller steps that Starmer's wanting to agree. They're not going to work on a bespoke deal to join the single market, which would require the unanimous agreement of all EU and EFTA states and would take 10 to 15 years at an optimistic outlook. But we will eventually get there if Labour get the time and space. If we want to help them, we should be raising the profile of more useful pressures. We should be getting Labour to do things that it can realistically do that it is not currently doing. For example, we should be asking for an economic impact assessment for Brexit, or individual parts of it. For a start, maybe an economic impact assessment on being outside the single market. That'll do for starters. But with or without that, what Labour are proposing is a step-by-step re-entry to the EU. It doesn't inevitably mean we end up with EU membership. Is there a way in which Labour can get what it wants now and in 50 years' time we're still not in the EU? Well, yes, in theory. Which is why it's important to keep raising our voices, why events like the Rejoin March next month are really important to get as many people out as possible. We have to keep making the case that Britain wants to be back inside the EU. But although lies pulled us out, they're not going to take us back in. Small steps will. And even if they didn't, they would still improve our current situation. The more we diverged, the more we suffered. I've said before, if Labour can get some of these agreements again, then in a few years' time, we'll have the data to show how Divergence made us worse off. We've already got that. And then closer relations made us better off. At that point, you've got a very strong argument. And what do the Brexiteers do about that? Well, different ones have their own ideas. But O'Flynn has one which, in theory, you could say, OK, I can see how, if it all panned out, that could safeguard your Brexit. But his specific proposal is very unlikely to occur. He suggests that the Conservative Party needs to sort itself out, get a charismatic leader, and come to an accommodation reform UK. Now, the nuts and bolts of this idea are obviously quite right. There is no other government that's really going to explicitly be hard Brexit other than the Conservative Party, okay? So he's suggesting that the only way to safeguard Brexit is to get the Conservatives back in government. Of course, he's assuming that the Conservatives will remain a hard Brexit party. I notice that the current Conservative leadership candidates, and the ones who are in the fight to become the next leader, are not going to be taking them back to power, by the way. But the ones in the fight right now aren't really talking about Brexit, are they? Not really spending much time talking about Brexit. So even the current leadership candidates, for whatever reason, and there's various reasons they could be, it could be because they want to take a more pragmatic approach, but they know that that's not how to appeal to party members. Or it could be that they are genuinely hard Brexiteers themselves, but they know they're on shaky ground. They haven't really got anything to defend it with. But for whatever reason, there's not a lot of Brexit discussion going on in the Tory leadership contest so far. So O'Flynn may be here making an assumption here. Because consider the attitude towards Brexit of Sunak's administration. That was way more pragmatic. And that was because it was what most Tory MPs wanted him to do. The distance maintained with the EU was largely to keep the Brexit headbangers from exploding in their midst. But if we suppose that the Conservatives are unlikely to become a serious electoral prospect until they've tamed the swivel-eyed loons to a certain extent, then it may well be that the next time they can seriously plan for power, they'll have had to adopt a much more realistic Brexit position. And then consider sort of the fourth dimension to this. So when they're getting ready, okay, for the next election, we sort of think the Conservatives are not going to sort themselves out for the next election. So you're probably talking 8 to 10 years' time, right? Labour will have moved us much more closely to the EU by then. We'll be on a much closer footing. The benefits will be obvious to most key voters. The Labour government will, as much as anyone else, want to point out these benefits. At that point, it's very unlikely the Conservatives will be able to stand on a platform of dismantling it. Because think back to when David Cameron was getting the Tories ready to come back to power 15 years ago, after an extended period in opposition. It was essentially on a promise of maintaining what Labour had built, just doing so in a fiscally better way, tax cuts and blackjack. In fact, forget the tax cuts because they put those up straight away. But that's what they promised, wasn't it? They didn't promise to dismantle everything Labour had done. They basically said, oh yeah, we'll maintain all this. We'll just do it in a more financially prudent sense. So the idea that the Tories, after another 5 or 10 years, could possibly mount a successful campaign based on taking us back to the dark days of the extreme Tory Brexit, that seems fanciful. Then there's this idea of an agreement with Reform UK. Again, the basic premise makes sense. Reform UK take a lot of votes from the Tories' right flank. Because of that, not only are the Tories getting fewer votes, making it harder for them to win seats, but it means they're not focusing on the centre ground. The Conservatives traditionally could take votes on the right wing, or the very right wing, for granted, and they focus entirely on the centre ground. They're not doing that. If they want to win the election, they need to, but they're not doing that. So, but by definition, Reform UK, they're not going to stand, whatever agreement the Tories come up with, they're not going to stand candidates down in return for a Tory party that then fights the centre ground. So the idea falls a little bit flat. In fact, it's hard to imagine how a Conservative party which continues to define itself in terms of an extreme Brexit offering ever becomes an attractive prospect for voters. What the Conservatives needed to do about Reform UK was not let it grow in the first place. You'd almost feel that what the Brexiteers really want is to keep the Tories trapped in a hard Brexit mode, in the hope that dissatisfaction eventually makes voters flip back to the Tories when they get tired of a Labour government. The problem is people in Labour thought that of the Tories as well. Oh, we'll just wait because people eventually get tired of them. No, they don't. But I'm not sure that's much of a strategy. Ironically, you could argue it works better for the Tories because they've got the media on their side. But in 10 years' time, Labour will be urging the public not to let... They will be able to show benefits. They'll be able to show the NHS fixed, various other public sector services fixed. They'll be able to show income in a better place, the standard of living will be better, housing will be in a better place. All of these things will be in a better place, right? That's why those are the things they've started on early now, because they know they need those things to be in a better place, right? In 10 years' time. So they will be arguing, don't let the Tories wreck it all and take us back to those dark days that we're experiencing right now. I'm not sure the Conservatives are going to come out and help Labour by going, yeah, we want to take you all back to those dark days. I don't think they're going to do that. And so if Brexiteers really do think that their best chance of preserving their unholy mess is that the Conservatives completely take leave of their senses and run future campaigns on the basis of wanting to take us back to the early 20s, they may as well accept that Brexit is dead and buried, because either the Conservatives are going to do that, in which case they're not going to be in power, or they're not going to do that, in which case they won't be their defenders of Brexit after all. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.